In this video, we are going to make a code review for microservice resilience, observability, and monitoring topics for our e-commerce microservice architecture. So let me start with the microservice resilience implementation. So as you remember that in the last videos, we have learned microservice resilience pattern and practices. So in this example repository, we can also apply some of the resilience patterns. When making the microservices more resilient, we can use HTTP client factory to implement resilient HTTP requests, and also we have implemented retry and circuit breaker patterns with exponential backoff with HTTP client factory and using the poly libraries. Here you can see the poly, which is the library that we can apply resilience patterns when the integration or invoking any API into our client application or internal microservices. So I'm going to give an example how we can run and apply retry and circuit breaker in the application. For example, client application invoke the API gateway to perform the business use case for the internal microservices. So how we can invoke these APIs and how we can make these invocations more resilient. So in order to do that, let's open this client application, and as you remember that for every service we basically invoke the target microservices over the API gateway. These are the API gateway URLs that we are going to trigger and invoke these API with using the HTTP client object. But we would like to make more resilient all these integrations for the basket, catalog, and ordering invocations. For that purpose, in the startup CS, we basically provide set of rules and policies when any integration happens. So if you scroll down, you can see the configure services. This class is running when the application startup. So that means when we are creating any HTTP client object, we are going to following these policies and these configurations. Here you can see that we are adding HTTP client object into our ASP.NET application when the application startup. And also we are adding some additional configuration. You can see in here we have adding 3 configuration for every integrations. So this is for the API gateway, catalog service, basket, and order service, and every integration has a configuration with the logging, and also adding 2 new policy, which is the get retry and get circuit breaker policy. So with adding these 2 policies for the HTTP client objects when integrating for those 3 microservices, we basically apply retry and circuit breaker pattern in together. So if you go to this method, if you scroll down, you can go to this method, which is the retry policy method. We basically perform 5 times retry count if there is a transient error or any down or short period errors that occurs from the target microservices. We have applied 5 times retry, but you can see this example in here. When we are applying 5 times retry, the sleep duration provide and retry count and retry time, different time intervals that we are going to apply for the backoff interval times. You can see that the first retry happens after 2 seconds, the second retry happens 4 seconds, and the third retry count happens after 8 seconds, and so on. So this is the retry policy and retry strategy that we are going to follow when we can't get response from the target microservices. And after the retry policy, we have applied the circuit breaker pattern. So that means if the target microservice is totally down and not responding at all, we can run the circuit breaker policy. That means if the target microservice not responding at all, we can close the connection and return lastly getting exception to the client application to protect our resources. So by this way, we can handle events allowed before breaking 5 times, and we are stop the communication between microservices for the 30 seconds, and after 30 seconds these will be monitor and check the target microservice is up and running. If the target microservice is up and running, this time circuit breaker is closed and continue the communication as usual. So that means we have applied both retry and circuit breaker policy for the whole integration from the client application and the API gateway. So this is the best practice when we are integrating in the microservice distributed microservices, because error happens every time, and this could be make an application resilient and protect your application for the transient errors. And for the second topic is microservices observability. So basically we have implementing centralized distributed logging with Elasticsearch, Elastic which including the Elasticsearch, Logstash and Kibana, and we use Serilog as a pushing the logs in the Elasticsearch for the ASP.NET microservices to perform the distributed and centralized logging microservices. So for that purpose, we basically using every microservices. You can see in here, for example, catalog microservices. You can see that when we are performing any log operations, we are pushing the logs to the Elasticsearch. So how we can pushing the logs? Basically, we are using the logger object to logging any exception or successful in this application as usual. After that, we all push the logs in the centralized Elasticsearch place. So how we can do that? For every microservices has program CS class from the ASP.NET startup and bootstrapping this application. So in the program CS, you can see that we are using Serilog library in order to move these logs to the centralized place, which is the Elasticsearch. We are using Serilogger static class to configuring this Serilog. If you go to definition this class, you can see that we are going to under building blocks and Serilog CS class, which is the activating and configuring the whole logging configuration for the Elasticsearch configuration. In the first line, we are getting the Elasticsearch URI, and after that we are configuring the logging environment and logging configurations, and after that we are going to push this log in the centralized Elastic Stack with using this class when the application bootstrap. And this mechanism is works for every microservices when the application startup in the program CS. You can check for all the microservices and also client applications and so on. So this was the microservice observability part, and the last part is microservices health checks. You can see in here we are going to implement web status microservices, which is implementation of health status for every microservices. So where we are implementing these web status, you can go to the web applications under the source folder. You can see that we have a web status microservices, and in here we basically implement the health check configuration for every microservices. You can come here and see that in the startup CS we basically using ASP.NET add health check UI, and in the application settings file you can see that we are going to check for every microservices health check with using /hc URL and collect these information and represent this information into view of these web status application. You can see that we are redirecting to health checks UI, and with using the library, this is going to retrieve the health check information and represent the web UI for checking all microservices into our architecture. So here you can see that with this application we can check all status of the microservices in the application. So basically, as you can see that we have implemented microservice resilience, observability and monitoring pattern and best practices in the architecture.